It could be, to me, possible that particles are like this. They're little stable twirls, vortices that stabilize after the non-stable stuff is dissipating. And to achieve this, I don't think that I need to posit that they are conscious. If it could be that I figure out, oh no, this is not sufficient. We need way more complicated math and structure to make this happen. So they need some kind of coherence improving operator that is self-reflexive and eventually leads to the structure. Then I would say, yeah, maybe this is a theory that we should seriously entertain. Until then, I'm undecided. And Occam's razor says I can construct what I observe at this level of elementary particles, atoms, and so on, by assuming that they don't have any of the conscious functionality that exists in my own mind. And the other way would be you can redefine the notion of consciousness into some principle of self-organization that is super basic. But this would redefine consciousness into something else, because there's a lot of self-organizing stuff that does not fall into the same category that an anesthesiologist makes go away when he gives you an anesthetic. And to me, consciousness is that thing which seems to be suspended when you get an anesthetic, and that stops you from learning and currently interacting with the world.
I mean, that at least gives me a chance to repeat once again my favorite quote from Bill Clinton, former U.S. president, which is that all depends what the meaning of is, right? So I'm in.
That's interesting, Ben, because the first time, Joscha, I don't know if you remember, I brought up that quote. I don't remember the context, but I said, yeah, that also depends on what is.
The question is, what do you mean by is, right? So visit the story.
That sounds like Bill Clinton.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yeah.
The previous podcast with Joscha Bach as a solo episode is linked in the description, as well as the previous podcast with Ben solo, as well as Joscha Bach with Donald Hoffman and Joscha Bach with John Vervaeke. Every link, as usual, to every source mentioned in this podcast on every single Toe podcast is in the description.
Yeah, I mean, a couple reactions there, and I feel I may have lost something in the buffering process there, but I think that let me see. So that first of all, about causality and firstness or raw experience, I mean, almost by definition of how Peirce sets up his metaphysical categories, I mean, if firstness doesn't cause anything, so you're not going to come up with a case where, like, I need to assume that this particle has experience, or else I can't explain why this experiment came out this way. I mean that would be a sort of category error in Peirce's perspective. So if the only sort of thing you're willing to attribute existence to is something which has a demonstrable causal impact on some experiment, then by that assumption, I mean that's essentially equivalent to the perspective you're putting forth, that everything is computation, yeah. And Peirce didn't think other categories besides third were of that nature. Now, there's also a just shallow semantic matter tied into this, which is the word consciousness is just highly ambiguous. So, I mean, Joscha, you seem to just assume that human-like consciousness is consciousness, and I don't really care if people want to reserve the word consciousness for that. Then we just need some other word for the sort of ambient awareness and everything in the universe, right? So there's lengthy debates among academics on, like, okay, do we say a particle is conscious, or do we say it's proto-conscious, right? So then you can say, okay, we have proto-consciousness versus consciousness, or we have, like, raw consciousness versus reflexive consciousness or human-like consciousness. And I mean, I spent a while reading all the stuff. I wrote some things about it. In the end, I'm just like, this is a game that overly intellectual people are playing to entertain themselves, and it doesn't really matter. Like I've got my experience of the universe. I know what I need to do to build AGI systems, and arguing about which words to associate with different flavors and levels of experience is, you're just kind of running around in circles. But of course,
for me, conceptually, it's an important question. Is this camera that is currently filming my face and representing it and then relaying it to you aware of what it's doing? And is this just a matter of degree with respect to my consciousness? And is this representing some kind of ambient awareness of the universe? And are particles doing the same thing? And so on. These are questions that I think I can answer. And if I don't answer them, my thinking will become so mushy that my thoughts are meaningless and I will not be able to construct anything.
I mean, if the only kind of answer that you're interested in are rigorous scientific answers, then you have your answer by assumption, right? And I mean, answering questions by assumption is fine. It's practical. It saves our time, right? But I mean, I don't. I mean, you will.
No, I think that's what you're doing. I don't see how you're not just trying to answer by assumption. You posit that elementary particles are conscious. When I point out that we normally reserve the word consciousness for something that is really interesting and fascinating and shocking to us.
You mean,
and that it would even be more shocking if we projected into the elementary particles. And then you say, okay, but I just mean ambient awareness. Now we have to disassemble what ambient awareness actually means. What is aware here? What does this awareness come down to? And I think that you're pointing at something that I don't want to dismiss. I want to take you seriously here. So there is something to what you are saying, but you're not getting away with simply waving at it and say this is sufficient to explain my experience, and I'm no longer interested to make my words mean things. Because they cannot communicate otherwise. We will not be able to see what idea you actually have, what idea you're trying to convey, and how it relates to ideas that other people might have. And I'm not pointing at the institutions of science here, which don't agree on what consciousness is, and for the most part don't care. This is more a philosophical question here. And it's also one that is an existential question that we have to negotiate among the two or the three of us.
Yeah, let's just let Ben respond.
I mean, I guess, rightly or wrongly, as a human being, I've gotten bored with that question in the same way that, like, I couldn't say it's worthless. At some point, maybe you could convince someone. Like, I know people who were convinced by materials they read on the internet to give up on Mormonism or Scientology, right? So I can't say it's worthless to debate these points with people who are heavily attached to an ideology. I think is silly. On the other hand, I personally just tend to get bored with repeated debates so that go over the same points over and over again. If I had an infinite number of clones, then I wouldn't. And this, I guess, one of the things that I get worn out with is people claiming my definition of this English word is the right one, and your definition is the wrong one. And I guess you weren't really doing that, Joscha, but it just gave me a traumatic memory of too many
I'm sorry
debates.
for triggering you here.
Yeah.
I just let us. I'm not fighting about words. I don't care which words you're using. But so when I think about an experience of what it's like and associate that with consciousness or a system that is able to create a now, the perception of a now, then I'm talking about a particular phenomenon that I have in mind, and I would like to recreate if I can, and I want to understand how it works. And so for me, the question of whether I project this property into arbitrary parts of what I consider to be reality is important. I understand if it's not interesting to you, and I won't force you into any discussion that would make you drop out of your particular Mormonism. I'm happy with you being a Mormon.
Let me tell you how I'm looking at anesthesia, which is a concrete, specific example that's not that trivial, right? Because that I've only been under anesthesia once, which I have wisdom teeth removed, so what wasn't that bad. But other people have had far more traumatic things done when they're under anesthesia. And there's always the nagging fear that, like, since we don't really know how anesthesia works in any fundamental depth, and also don't really know how the brain generates our usual everyday states of consciousness in enough depth, it's always possible that while you're under anesthesia, you're actually, in some sense, some variant of you is feeling that knife slicing through you, and maybe just the memories being cut off, right? And then once you come back, you don't remember it. But then that might not be true. But then you have to ask, well, okay, say then, while my jaw is being cut open by that knife, does the jaw feel it, right? Like, does the jaw hurt while it's being sliced up by the knife? Like, is the jaw going, ah? Well, on the other hand, the global workspace in your brain, like the reflective theater of human-like consciousness in your brain, may well be disabled by the anesthetic. So the way I personally look at that is, I suspect under anesthesia, your sort of reflective theater of consciousness is probably disabled by that anesthetic. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's probably disabled, which means there's probably not like a version of Ben going, ah, wow, this really hurts. This really hurts. And then forgetting it afterwards. So, I mean, maybe you could do that, just like disable memory recording, but I don't think that's what's happening. On the other hand, I think the jaw is having its own experience of being sawed open. Now that, while you're getting that wisdom tooth removed under general anesthesia. Now, I think it's not the same sort of experience exactly as the reflective theater of consciousness that knows itself as Ben Goertzel is having. Like, the Ben Goertzel can conceptualize that it's experiencing pain. It can go like, ow, that really hurts. And then the thinking that's saying that really hurts is different than that which really hurts, right? There's many levels there, but I do think there's some sort of raw feeling that the jaw itself is having, like, even if it's not connected to that reflective theater of awareness in the brain. Now the jaw is biological cells. So some people would agree that those biological cells have experience, but they would think like, a brick, when you smash it with an axe, doesn't. But I suspect the brick also has that some elementary feeling. So, I mean, I think it is like something to be a brick that's smashed in half by an axe. On the other hand, that it's not like something that can reflect on what it is to be a brick smashed in half by an axe, right? So, I mean, that's is how I think about it. But again, I don't know how to make that science, because I can't ask my jaw what it feels like, because my jaw doesn't speak language. And even if I was able to like wire my brain into the jaw of someone else who's going through wisdom tooth removal under anesthesia, like I might say, like, through that wire, I can feel by an eye thou experience, like I can feel the pain of that jaw being sliced open. But I mean, you could tell me I'm just hallucinating that, and my own brain is like improvising that based on the signals that I'm getting. And I'm not sure how you really pin that down in an experiment, right?
Let me try. So there have been experiments about anesthesia, and I'm not an expert on anesthesiology, so I asked everybody for forgiveness if I get things wrong. But there have been different anesthetics, and some of them work in very different ways. And there is indeed a technique that basically works by giving people a muscle relaxant so they cannot move, and giving them something that inhibits the formation of long-term memory, so they cannot remember what happened to them in that state. And there have been experiments that surgeons did where they were applying a tourniquet to an arm of the patient, so the muscle relaxant didn't get into the arm, and they could still use the arm. And then in the middle of the surgery, they asked the person that was there, lying fully relaxed and incommunicado, to raise their arm, raise their hand, if they were conscious and aware of what is happening to them, and they did. And when they were asked if they had unbearable pain, they also raised their hand. And after the surgery, they didn't forget it, they had forgotten about it.
If you enjoyed that clip, then the full podcast is out right now. You can click around here, as well as subscribe to get notified. Enjoy.